Good day and welcome to TiEcon 2021. My name is Vijay Menon. I'm the Executive Director with TiE Global, and I'm also the co-chair for the Global Connect track. In the Global Connect track, we've heard some fabulous keynotes from across the world. Our next panel is going to look at global innovation ecosystems. Today, innovation, technology, and venture capital is all over the world, not just in Silicon Valley. Whether it is Sao Paulo or San Diego in Latin America, Cape Town or Nairobi in Africa, Bangalore, Hanoi, or Jakarta in Asia, we see unicorns from all these places. Our panel today is a distinguished set of venture capitalists who invest in all of these ecosystems, and you'll hear from them shortly. To moderate this panel, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Andy Tsao, the Managing Director of Silicon Valley Bank and a board member at TiE Silicon Valley. Andy has over 20 years of experience in the banking industry and deep connects with venture capitalists across the globe. He runs Silicon Valley Bank's Global Gateway program, where he helps emerging technology entrepreneurs with their business strategy for entry into the US and international markets, with their banking needs, and with debt if they so require. Andy has worked with Silicon Valley Bank in the UK and in Boston. In the UK, he developed deep relationships with the European Venture Capital Association, and in Boston with the technology ecosystem in New England. Over to you, Andy, and thanks for doing this panel.
Thank you, Vijay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Andy Tsao. I'm, again, a Managing Director with Silicon Valley Bank and head of our Global Gateway business, which is spending time in new and emerging technology hubs around the world. I'm really excited today to have a fantastic panel of investors from around the world who are going to join us today for a discussion on what's happening in each of their regions. And so if we can kick things off, I'd like to ask my panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves and their firms. And I'll start with you, Christine.
Great, thank you, Andy. My name is Christine Kenna. I'm a partner at IGNIA. We were one of the earliest and most active venture capital funds in Latin America. We're currently based in Mexico City. And our focus is in investing in new businesses and entrepreneurs that are expanding into and across Latin America and focusing on those companies that are bringing new products and goods through technology to the emerging middle class in the region.
Thank you, Christine. Edith, please.
Hi, Andy. My name is Edith Yeung. I'm with the general partner in Raise Capital. We particularly focus on early to A, prefer to lead, all things enterprise developer tools, open source, open core.
Thank you, Edith. And around my Zoom, over to you, Rob.
I'm Rob Hersov, based in Cape Town, South Africa. I've got a number of different businesses focused on Africa, advisory businesses, but I've just announced that I'm one of 3 founding partners in a $200 million Africa tech growth fund called Norshen 22.
Wow, fantastic. Breaking news, and congratulations. I'm looking forward to see what comes of that. Steve, over to you to wrap up intros.
Thanks, Andy. I'm one of the founding partners of DN Capital. We're one of the longest standing venture capital firms in Europe, headquartered in London with offices in Berlin and in Menlo Park. I run our US practice and help our companies in Europe get to the US and our US companies get into Europe.
Thank you, Steve. And again, in terms of the Global Gateway business at the bank, we're focused on Latin America, India, Australia, New Zealand, and as well as the MENA region. I've had the pleasure of spending time in each of the tech hubs that we're going to spend time in today, with the exception of Africa. But that's certainly a market that we have our eye on, given the amount of activity that's happening there. So let me set the stage a little bit thematically in terms of what we saw in 2020, and kind of build off of that. It's a narrative that we've seen around the world, and not that different from what happened here in the U.S. And that was, when the COVID-19 pandemic kicked in a little over a year ago, we saw a real shock to the venture capital ecosystem with a sharp decline in activity in Q2 of last year. You saw that sort of bottom out and begin to recover in Q3. And by Q4, we're back to pre-COVID level investment activity, in some cases even greater, really punctuated by these large mega funding rounds, similar to what was happening here in the U.S. And I think, here in the U.S., we had an all-time high in terms of venture capital activity at $166 billion. So really, who would have thought that could have happened at the start of the pandemic a year ago? And it was amazing to see that sort of play out around the world. So why don't we start then and dive in? We're going to spend some time with each of our panelists talking about their regions. And we're going to start with, again, with Christine, if we can go with you and what's happening in Latin America. The Latin American Venture Capital Association, LAVCA, just released their 2020 numbers for last year, and we saw VC funding eclipsed $4 billion for the second year in a row. And when you consider in 2019 you had the $1 billion Wrapup transaction, it really means that 2020 was a terrific year by all accounts for the amount of venture capital invested. So, Mexico certainly got record levels of funding in over 2020. You had Avax, the first Mexican unicorn. So from your view, Christine, what's happening in LATAM and maybe featuring Mexico a little bit too? Is Mexico really kind of arrived and sort of taken some of the spotlight from Brazil?
Yeah, well, it's been a very fascinating year, and I think we're really just getting started. And I think what's important, especially on this global conversation, is to sort of put into perspective Latin America. And if you think about it, it has double the population of the United States, about half that of China and India, about half of that of the GDP. But so really, it's to me, where I've been investing for the last 10 years here, it is no surprise the activity that we're seeing. I think what is really interesting, the question is really what has happened now. And how is it that the investment dollars went from 2 billion to 4 billion, almost 5 billion, and then 4 billion again this year, which is just exceptional. And I think it's a number of factors. Without a doubt, it is this demographic. I mean, this enormous pent-up demand, where really the fact that we have smartphone penetration basically in everyone's hand, the connectivity, which we've never seen before. Latin America has certainly leapfrogged a number of regions, and technology has finally been an enabler to really bring the change and provide the better goods and services that the most underserved segment or population in the world has been suffering for so many years. And so we're seeing that the technology is being backed by the amount of dollars and the number of innovative companies that are coming into the region. It's also important to point out that in Latin America, they've one of the youngest populations globally. And so that sort of rate of adaptation and change is very important for this younger population that is able to embrace the new technology. And so, of course, all of this has been accelerated by COVID, right? And I think we're going to see this across all of the regions, of course. But while the damage has been catastrophic on a social level, for the technology and innovation level, it has been astronomical, the rate of change that we've seen this acceleration. And so while we've seen some segments such as everything related to e-commerce, digital economy, payments, fintech, just be incredible growth rates, that is sort of the good side of what we've seen. And we've been expecting this to happen. It just happened overnight. And then really, I think the third factor that explained this incredible boom over the last year and what we'll see going forward is the amount of capital that is in the region. While local funds like IGNIA, we've been around for a while, and what we've seen in the last year, local funds are still participating in over 80% of the deals and transactions we are co-investing. What we've never seen before is not only the rate and quantity and amount of dollars that are coming from these large international funds, like the Andreessen Horowitz, like the Excels, like the Lightspeeds. It's not just a fad. They've actually been making a number of transactions, committing serious capital, where, from some of the numbers that I've seen, that these international funds have been participating in the deals that represent over 83% of the capital in the region. So they're here, and I'm certainly hopeful that they're here to stay. But that sort of support is going to allow the companies that have been seeded in the region to really continue to grow and accelerate. And we're seeing these first unicorns, it's just beginning. But again, I feel like this is no surprise for those of us that have been on the ground. And that is one of the things. We know the talent is here. We know the market opportunity is here. And it's finally being aligned with the amount of capital that is coming into the region.
Yeah, the combination of local investors like IGNIA and then co-investing with some of the growth investors coming from the U.S. and other markets is a pretty potent combination. We've seen now what I think there are more than 20 unicorns across the region at this point. Christine, if we can spend a moment just talking about some of the tech clusters around LATAM, what are you seeing in terms of sort of the best opportunities across the region?
Well, so I think everyone has focused on Brazil. Brazil has been, it's sort of the large hub for technology. And that, without a doubt, I think has been really the pioneer within the region. But it's very much its own ecosystem, which is the way it's been for many years in the past. I think what we're seeing changing now is that it's not just Brazil and then Spanish-speaking Latin America. It is really the whole region that is coming together. And we've seen this from a number of examples. And companies such as Nubank, which is one of the largest, I would say, fintechs globally right now, with the latest $25 billion valuation. But, they started out in Brazil, but really now they're a very relevant player in the fintech segment in Mexico and then expanding into Colombia. Just one of many, many more examples. So I also see that within the Spanish-speaking region has always been Mexico, because of the concentration of not only the tech talent and the investors, but also the population and the relevance of the market size. But these two regions are now really coming together, and I think that's been extremely important. So where do we see the hot sectors? Absolutely fintech. And this has been a hot sector. I think it's going to continue to be a hot sector. But I think that just has to go with the fact that we've had such poor services from the traditional financial service industry. And then now is a time when actually, through all of the legislation and regulation change that has been coming, which is very important and very relevant for the region, that you see not only Mexico, but Brazil now embracing open banking, and Argentina and Chile following as well. I think that regulatory change is going to continue to allow fintech to be a very hot segment going forward.
And last question before we move on, if I keep it as brief as you can, just in terms of what we've seen in the press with the pandemic, it's kind of going to be a little bit of a long tail in the region in Latin America, given the availability of vaccines, et cetera. How do you see that playing out? Is there a correlation or impact to the startup ecosystem with the recovery of COVID?
Well, I think the ecosystem overall has been thriving despite the fact that people have been at home. And I think that's going to continue. I think the new habits, the consumer habits, are going to stay. So while I am certainly hopeful that the vaccine rollout will continue, I really just think that it's going to continue to be an incredible amount of positive change for the tech industry, as the consumers are going to maintain these habits. If you just look at what's happened within the purchasing your groceries online, all of those changes, they're going to stay. And so I think it's actually, for the tech industry, it's been very beneficial and will continue to be so.
Thank you, Christine. Rob, if I could move to you, let's talk about what's happening in Africa. And I think in terms of funding levels, there was a similar pattern to LATAM, a little bit less. 2020 had a little less funding than 2019. I think the numbers I saw from Partech showed 1.43 billion in 2020 relative to 2 billion in 2019. But when you consider that just in 2015 there was only $500 million of funding in the continent, that's still quite a bit of activity, and I'm going to guess growing. So, Rob, if we can, what's your perspective on what's happening in Africa?
So the big news in Africa, it's on the move in a meaningful way. The venture capital investors for the last 15 years driven in Maine by the DFI money, has seeded the continent, and the unicorns are coming through. A month and a half ago, Flutterwave, Paystack, here they come. The African unicorns are coming. There are 55 countries in Africa. It's a complicated market. There's Anglophone, Francophone, Lusophone countries. And of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world by GDP, 6 are in Africa. But that isn't the story, because if you take the tech hubs that are in this order, Cape Town, Lagos, Nairobi, Johannesburg, Cairo, 5 tech hubs, 2 in South Africa, and you look at those countries' GDP and you strip out technology by looking at Google Analytics, Facebook, and the adoption of LinkedIn, those are the sort of business drivers, the business digital economy is taking off like a rocket, 100% growth rate. So Africa is on the move in a meaningful way. And there's no shortage of entrepreneurs and human capital. What's lacking is money, growth capital. So the big news, we're raising this $200 million fund. We've got 55 million and we haven't launched yet. So there's huge demand. And I think Africa is going to impress and surprise people. And much like LATAM, it's, fintech, but very much edutech, health tech, and reg tech, because many of our African governments are terrible. Not all of them, some are actually quite good, but most are pretty poor. And regulation technology, reg tech, is going to leapfrog. Final comment, 1.2 billion people in Africa, of which 60% are younger than 25 years old, 60%. And when smartphones are in everyone's hand and the prices are coming down, in the next 5 and 10 years, they're all going to be 25 and 30 years old. We're going to have the biggest digital population in the world. So keep an eye on Africa.
Rob, I know your fund's going to take advantage of these opportunities, but with Jumia's IPO, Sequoia coming into OK recently, do you think Africa is really on people's radar screen now? Has it become more prime time from your view?
Not really. A lot of the Silicon Valley rock stars have paid lip service to Africa. Jack Dorsey, I want to come live in Africa. Hasn't turned up yet. Where's Zuckerberg? None of them, for whatever the reason, none of them have actually paid attention. Maybe they have bigger fish to fry elsewhere. But with Hans Otterling of North Zone and with Niklas Adelbert and Norsen Foundation teaming up with me to focus on Africa, I think people are going to take notice, because we're going to also be calling the Sequoias and Index and IGNIAs and others and saying, we've got a great transaction, come and invest with us. So I think our fund will create a lot of momentum to bring people into Africa, which is a good thing.
And last question to you as well, similar to the question I asked Christine. Africa hasn't been in the press as much about the pandemic the way that India and Latin America has. What's the state of the pandemic, and how do you see that impacting, if at all, as Christine said, the innovation economy in Africa going forward?
So Africa's been hit by a lot of plagues and disease over the years, HIV, Ebola, and, we just survive and plug on. We have not yet had a vaccination in South Africa. So everyone on here has had their vaccinations. I haven't yet. I'm waiting for mine. I have a feeling that, South Africa has herd immunity already. And I do think Africa is just going to, like most problems, power through. We're survivors. Now we're going to thrive.
Amazing. All right. Well, let's keep moving around the world here, and over to you, Edith. And, again, with obviously with the pandemic in last year, China was quite impacted initially, but now things are completely back to normal, as I understand it. How is the venture ecosystem in China today? How has it recovered from last year's pandemic?
Yeah, I think when we look at China, we should look at, of course, funding activities, exit, unicorn, and just market expansion in general. My family in Beijing actually been operating normally back to the office since April last year. So not only is been normal, it's been normal over a year. Having said that, venture funding have dropped a little bit. Is about some of the report I read is 118 billion in 2020, which even that is actually quite a drop compared to the year before and the year before that. So in China, terms has definitely slowed down, but compared to the rest of the world, it's been up and running. But what's really interesting when we look at China market, I love Christine and Rob that give the comparison in terms of population. So I will do that too. It's about 1.3 billion in terms of population, which is 4 times the population of the US. And everybody, including my mother, who's actually just don't even like anything in technology, even she's on a smartphone. So very, very, very high penetration rate. And if you think about it, right, most of the world #1 unicorn, number 1 of the world is actually from China, which is ByteDance, worth 140 billion. And then also Didi, which is also the top 10 unicorn in the world. So China itself, I think, is really running a parallel universe, because in some sense, because the market is so big and highly monetizable, so market expansion is really 2 parallel universe compared to the rest of the world. And then on top of that, what's really interesting, I think, in the last 12 months, because of a lot of conflict between China and US, more and more Chinese company is going public, sort of more on mainland soil, in addition to the Shanghai Stock Exchange or Shenzhen Stock Exchange. Last year, JD Health and also Kuaishou both actually got listed in Hong Kong. And if you actually look at sort of the top 10 unicorn in China, including Tencent, Meituan, Xiaomi, many of them are not only looking at a US listing anymore. It's more or less protecting themselves, are listing more in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is now the number 2 most active stock exchange in the world after the New York Stock Exchange. So in some sense, I think it's very interesting to look at both, not only market expansion, also exit, and then just looking at ByteDance and what happened to that. I think less and less Chinese company were going to think about the rest of the world just because politically it's tough. But the market itself is big enough, so you can actually have very, very nice exit without actually venture out of China.
Yeah, so you have this. This was beginning to happen pre-COVID anyway, in terms of as you mentioned, Edith, the geopolitical tensions with the U.S. Do you see the China ecosystem and the U.S. ecosystem, and as well as some of the technologies like 5G, et cetera, do you see them developing on parallel paths at this point going forward?
Yeah, so there's a few things happening, mostly because of political reason, and you see a lot of, on a daily basis, certain Chinese company getting blacklisted, including Huawei, and certain US company like Qualcomm, Nvidia, and Micron may or may not be able to sell their chipset to some of the Chinese companies. So because of that, semiconductor is attracting a lot of government support and venture funding on mainland soil. And then on top of that, in China, healthcare obviously has already been quite digitized. That's doing really, really well. I don't think that is going to go away. I think that trend will continue to stay. It's so fascinating to me to hear Christine and Rob, I'm sure from Stephen as well, on what's hot. FinTech right now is not so hot. You think that originally with Ant Financial was supposed to go public, but it did not happen. And there's got a lot of scrutiny from the government to sort of basically reset the stage in terms of regulation on the FinTech industry. So that's a little bit of setback, although I am still bullish and positive that it will go public someday. But a lot of things, a lot of dust need to settle first.
And last question for you, Edith, in terms of Hong Kong itself, as a technology hub, you have Cyberport, you have the Science Park. Is it developing as a tech hotspot as well?
I'm born and raised in Hong Kong. Also started a nonprofit called Founders Hong Kong, also about connecting Silicon Valley and Hong Kong. Super bullish on Hong Kong. We have 10 unicorn now. And actually, the first TiEcon, which worth 10 billion, which is they raised 1.5 billion last year, called Lala Move. So Hong Kong is a hub for fintech because basically the world's biggest bank, from Goldman to Morgan Stanley. I think SVB. I think Andy, you may have. Do you guys have a small office there too?
Yeah, we do.
Awesome. So the testimonial for Hong Kong definitely have tons of talent in the fintech space and also logistics. And I think, Hong Kong is is a great stepping stone for anybody want to go to China. But I'm also seeing a lot of Hong Kong unicorn going to Southeast Asia as well. So I'm super excited at Hong Kong, and I think we will have more and more sort of the fintech and logistic unicorn coming soon.
Thank you, Edith. All right. Well, last but not least, let's go to Steve to talk about Europe. And again, similar to the U.S. market, Europe hit an all-time high of venture capital investment at 42.88 billion, and so a really remarkable year as it relates to the level of activity. And Steve and I spent time together in Europe many years ago, and it's just, given the amount of unicorns today and the growth of the ecosystem, it's really really come into its own. So those are the question to you, Steve, is what's happening in Europe, and has it really finally arrived as a true technology powerhouse?
I appreciate that, Andy. And yeah, you're right. When we were together in Europe, the European venture ecosystem was quite small. There weren't a lot of big exits. I think prior to about 2003, you had maybe one company that would have been considered to be a unicorn, which was in the gaming space, and then shortly thereafter, Skype, and now well over 100 that we can identify. Europe has always been strong in traditional industries, banking, automotive. You think about some of the great auto brands in the world, retail, fashion, supermarkets. And when technology was just about pure technology, there really wasn't a lot happening in Europe. The first generation, yes, with companies like Linux in the open source space and companies in the semiconductor space, there was a big gap when the software industry was really taking over. It was really Silicon Valley. But as technology has moved from servicing industry to replacing industry, this is where Europe really comes into its own. Europe really has a lot of expertise in go-to-market businesses. So you look at companies like our company, Auto One, which we took public at about $10 billion earlier this year. You look at companies that are involved in the food space, Gorillas, which got valued in $1 billion within about a year and a half. There are rumors that it's now going at 5 to 10 billion in terms of its next round. These traditional industries, the banking sector as well, this is where Europe shines. And that's caused a lot of money to also flow in the European ecosystem. Because the US valuations have been so high, a lot of the US firms have looked to Europe in terms of where they're going to go next. Now, Lightspeed has an office in Europe, Sequoia has an office, we see Battery there, we see Bessemer there. Many of these firms recognize the opportunity for great companies to be built. And of course, post-pandemic, you've seen companies grow very quickly in terms of valuation. Kazoo going to 7 billion valuation very quickly, Hopin to over 5 billion very quickly. I think you'll see some interesting things out of our online education company, Go Student, in the near term. So it's really become a golden age for European venture where we are right now.
Steve, certainly in our time when we were in London, the UK ecosystem was sort of the dominant one, and now you see, tech really developing, tech hubs developing in Germany, the Nordics, and Netherlands, for example. How do you see, regionally, and then the impact of Brexit on the venture ecosystem in Europe?
Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right. The UK, while still strong, you're seeing a lot of new hubs develop. Berlin really came to its own about 10, 12 years ago in terms of its origin, mostly out of the infrastructure built out by the Tsao brothers and then accelerating around 2013, 14. More recently, you've seen markets like Barcelona, Madrid. You've seen things coming out of Amsterdam and Copenhagen. We're seeing a lot coming out of Central Eastern Europe now, which we find quite exciting. Brexit is certainly
UiPath, right?
Well, UiPath, before that, you had LogMeIn, which is now, I think, 5 or 10 billion valuation, which originally its technology came from Central Europe. We've made a couple investments now in Poland as well, which we're excited about. Brexit has really, it's really hindered some of the potential out of the UK market because it makes it harder to bring the technologists that are coming from some of the great universities on the continent over into UK startups. That said, the UK market has always been a vibrant market, particularly for fintech. You're seeing groups like BBB substitute in for EIF to provide funding to the venture ecosystem. And of course, because of the language, UK will remain the first ports where the US VCs will come, you'll see a lot of direct investment competing with the UK firms from the US firms into UK startups. On the continent, you'll see more of the US firms partnering with firms like DN for those companies.
Be interesting to see it all play out. Well, gosh, we could spend so much more time in each of your regions. It's hard to do it in just a couple of minutes. But if I can pose a question for the panel, and we may not have time for all your responses, but what are you started to touch upon, hey, what are the hot sectors, and maybe what are some of the sectors that have been overfunded? Anybody want to take that?
I think a huge amount of funding is going to the digital infrastructure, and that's never a bad thing. But you know, everybody I speak to wants to raise a couple of $100 million, get into the data center business in Africa, and I think there's going to be at some point too many data centers. But at the moment, the digital infrastructure in Africa needs investment. It's infrastructure as opposed to tech, and the money's pouring in. So we'll see what happens there. But just one quick thing on Africa. You can hire 5 data scientists in Cape Town for the price of 1 in Silicon Valley. So we have a huge cost advantage over the US, and quality is equal. I think actually we're better than the Americans, but yeah, that's to be seen. I had to say that, didn't I?
You'll probably get some arguments from Christine.
Yeah, well, I'll throw it out.
On arbitrage.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, go ahead, Christine.
All right, no, I was going to take, sort of this contrarian view of the sides of like what sector is overheated. I actually don't think any sector yet is fully overheated in Latin America because of, you know, it's so interesting to hear all these perspectives and global perspectives, you know, especially Edith saying fintech is not what's happening now. Despite the fact that fintech in Latin America has 3 times the amount of investment capital and deals being done, there's still, it's just an infinite market. I mean, if you really think about it, now that there's like embedded fintech in every major company, you know, especially if you look at Mercado Libre or Rappi in Latin America, like they're fintech companies essentially, you know, when it comes down to it. So everything's sort of converging into that. So I wouldn't even call fintech overheated. And then, you know, what are the next segments? Digital commerce, prop tech, health tech. There's still so much ground to go. So you know, I've seen a few crazy valuations, but not too many yet.
Interesting contrast between fintech in Latin and other parts of the world and what Edith was saying about the impact of Ant Financial in China. Well, I know we're just about at time, but we do have one question from the audience, and that is, you know, with Coinbase going public recently, you know, the crypto. If we have a quick answer or two from you guys in terms of what's the status of crypto? Is it hot or not in your segments? Who wants to take a shot at that?
So right now, it's certainly not hot in Turkey, if you've been following the news of late. And you would say that it's fairly hot in France if you believe in NFTs. In my own view, what's going on with crypto is we're getting to a new level in terms of new products and new compliance related to that. So the next level of investment in crypto, I believe, is going to be similar to what Rob was saying in Africa FinTech, where it's going to be reg tech, you know, regulation technologies as applies to the crypto market.
I am a big believer in NFTs, so I think it's only just begun. I think 5,000 NFTs only have been minted in the world, so it's barely even scratched the surface. That's got a long way to go, and it's not a bubble yet.
I'm super bullish. Of course, I'm very biased. We invested in a company on the fintech infrastructure space called FTX. So essentially Coinbase, but for the rest of the world. They're doing 14 billion in trading volume a day and based out of Hong Kong. So super bullish on Coinbase and crypto.
Well, I think we're at time. I'm just going to wrap up the panel. Thank everybody for your fantastic insights today. I'll ask a one number response from each of you guys into what, as you look out at the second half of this year, going into 2022, from 1 to 10, how do you rate the venture opportunities in your markets? And Christine, we'll start with you again.
10.
Edith.
10.
Steve.
Wow, and tricky question. I'm going to go with 8 because I think the market opportunity is 10, but the things going on right now in terms of taxation and change in regulation could basically take a little bit of air out of the tire.
All right.
And Africa,
Rob.
Africa is an 11. The time is now.
Way to go, Rob.
Great answer. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. And thank you, audience, for tuning into our Global Connect track today.
Thank you,
Awesome.
guys. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.